During the next hour, we are going to present the scenes of Jesus Christ's life in the hours before his death. The tradition behind the Stations of the Cross began in the 5th century, when an interest developed in the Church to reproduce the holy places in other areas so pilgrims who could not actually travel to the Holy Land could do so in a devotional, spiritual way in their hearts. In the spirit of that tradition, these stations are offered in the form of Christ speaking from the heart. They give us an opportunity to interpret our reaction to Jesus. These reflections call each of us to ponder how we meet Christ in the praying of the stations. After each reenactment to the stations, we ask you to so kindly stay seated and spend a moment in personal reflection and silent meditation. Think about the words of Jesus and his thoughts. Please join me in saying the opening prayer. Dear Jesus, we are about to walk with you through the stages of your agony and death. We are about to spend a brief time renewing the sacrifice that gives us a life as Christians and that upholds us by the graces you have won. It brings us along the road to a salvation that all took place on Calvary, and it continues today by your sacrifice on the cross. Help us to understand a little better, to love a little more, and to give ourselves more generously by our use of these remembrances of your passion and death. Amen. Passover celebration is drawing near. Many country people arrived in Jerusalem several days early so that they could go through the cleansing ceremony before Passover began. They also wanted to see Jesus. The chief priests and other religious leaders were actively plotting the murder of Jesus. They were trying to find a way to kill him without starting a riot. A few days before the Passover ceremonies, just as Jesus and his disciples were nearing Bethany, outside of Jerusalem, he paused. Jesus sent 2 of the disciples on ahead, saying to them,
"Go into that village over there. As you enter, you will see a donkey tied up. Untie him and bring him here."
The 2 disciples went on their way and did as Jesus told them. They brought the donkey back to Jesus, and the disciples threw their cloaks across the donkey's back. Jesus rode on it to fulfill the ancient prophecy. "Tell Jerusalem her king is coming to her, riding humbly on a donkey's back." Many of the crowd threw down their cloaks along the road ahead of Jesus. Others cut branches from the trees and spread them out before him. The crowd surged on ahead and pressed along behind, shouting, "Hail to the King!" The entire city of Jerusalem was stirred as he entered. They asked,
"Who is this?"
"Jesus, prophet from Nazareth."
The arrest of Jesus. The chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. "What are we to do?" they asked. "If we let him go on like this, the whole world will follow him. The Romans will come in and swoop away our temple and our nation." From that day onward, there was a plan afoot to kill Jesus. To celebrate Passover, Jesus sent 2 disciples into the city to make ready a room for the dinner celebration. After dinner, Jesus went out to the Mount of Olives to pray with some of his disciples. While Jesus was speaking, Judas, one of the 12 apostles, arrived. With him was a large crowd, carrying swords and clubs. They were sent by the chief priests and the Jewish elders. The traitor had given the word a signal, saying to them, "The one I kiss is the one you want. Arrest him." When Judas arrived, he went straight to Jesus and said, "Peace be with teacher." Then Judas kissed Jesus. Jesus, aware of all that would happen to him, said,
"Who is it you want?"
"Jesus the Nazarene."
"I am he."
At that moment, the Jewish leaders stepped forward to lay hands on Jesus. Suddenly, one who had accompanied Jesus put his hand on a sword, drew it, and slashed at the high priest's servant, cutting off his ear. Jesus said to him,
Put your sword back where it belongs. Those who use the sword will perish by the sword. All this happens to make come true what the prophets wrote in the scriptures.
Then they arrested Jesus and took him away. The first station. Jesus is condemned to death. Pilate went back into the palace and called for Jesus to be brought to him. Pilate said to Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?"
Do you say this yourself, or have others told you about me?
Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own people and their chief priests brought you here. Why? What have you done?"
My kingdom is not of this world.
Pilate continued, "Then you are a king."
Yes, that was the reason I was born into this world.
Pilate tried to release Jesus, but the Jewish leaders told him, "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar's. Anyone who declares himself a king is a rebel against Caesar." Pilate said to the crowd, "Behold the man." But the people, prompted by the high priest, shouted,
Crucify him! Crucify him! Away with him! Away with him!
Pilate asked, "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate handed over Jesus to be crucified, because the people shouted even louder,
Crucify him! Crucify him!
Pilate has just read my death sentence. I am to be crucified. I could rebel against Pilate, but he is not my enemy. He's the envoy against my Father, and the voice of my human destiny. Pilate told me when and how I will die. You may not get that blessing. You won't have Pilate to tell you the time and place or circumstances of your death. Yet, you are as condemned to death as I am. You were destined to die the moment you were conceived. That is part of being human.
The second station. Jesus is scourged and crowned with thorns. The Roman soldiers took Jesus into the barracks. They cloaked him in a red military robe. They weaved a crown of thorns and put it on the head of Jesus. They mocked him, shouting as they did, "All hail, King of the Jews!" Taking ropes that were nearby, the soldiers proceeded to beat Jesus with them. They also jeered him. Pretending to pay him homage, they went down on their knees and began bowing to him. The soldiers took a large cross and placed it on his shoulders. They led him away to be crucified.
This instrument of suffering and death, this cross, has been thrust upon me. I do not curse this heavy timber, or those who have laid it on me. I embrace it to do my Father's will. The cross represents the choice I have to make, and my response to it is what gives it meaning. You must also carry the instruments of your own suffering and death. You were born with defects that you may control, but will never abolish. You have fatal flaws that cause pain and suffering. You want to be kind, patient, and understanding, but at times you find yourself mean, short-tempered, and cynical. Do not curse yourself or your limitations. My cross did not come from Pilate or the Roman soldiers. My cross came when I took on my Father's work and became human. Your crosses are the same. They are your credentials for being human. The question is not whether life brings crosses, but what your response will be to them. Embrace your humanity and bend to the wood of the cross. Learn the wisdom and triumph through your crosses.
The third station, Jesus falls for the first time. Pilate gave Jesus over to be crucified, so the leaders had him at last, and he was taken out of the city. He was to carry his cross to the place known as the Skull, in Hebrew, Golgotha. So Jesus proceeded on the road to his death. Jesus was so weak from the scourging and crowning of the thorns. Having lost a lot of blood because of his terrible treatment, Jesus fell to the ground. Nobody seemed ready to help him. They just left him there, suffering in pain. The soldiers pushed him, kicked him, and yelled at him to get up and keep going. Jesus somehow found the strength to get up and continue on his way to Calvary.
I have just fallen flat on my face. My work is not yet finished. I knew that doing the Father's work would be difficult, but I did not know it would hurt this much. Father, help me. Guide me to do your will. You can learn from my fall. You also will fall if you try too hard to succeed all by yourself. You will be tempted to take on more than you can do well, or you may be tempted to take on goals that, however worthy, may not be right for you. You might say to yourself, I'm going to achieve this goal. I'm going to do this by myself. Does this allow you to let our Father guide you?
The fourth station, Jesus meets his mother. With all the yelling and screaming going on, Jesus looked around the crowd. The people were shouting and screaming hateful things and dirty words. His eyes finally rested on someone in the crowd who loved him and shared in his own sorrow and pain. It was his own blessed mother. How painful and sad it must have been for Mary, the sorrowful mother, to have beheld her beloved son on his way to Calvary. She could not do much for him to stop the suffering, but she gave him a look that told him she was suffering with him. What terrible pain her most tender heart must have experienced. How earnestly did she desire to die in place of Jesus, or at least with him.
I have just seen Mary, my mother. I wish for a second that she and I could have been spared this meeting, which was short and painful. Was I trying to hide this final agony from her, thinking she might not be strong enough for it? Do you tend to avoid your loved ones, and they you, in times of crisis? Some spend a lifetime shielding their deepest selves from mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, husbands, and wives. In the end, this will fail, because your death exposes your weakness to your loved ones, as nothing in life can.
The fifth station. Simon of Cyrene helps Jesus carry the cross. As Jesus proceeded on his way to Calvary, he grew weaker and weaker. The soldiers were afraid that he might not make it to the hill of Calvary. So they grabbed a man out of the crowd, Simon by name, who had just come from the fields. They forced Simon to help Jesus carry his cross. Simon didn't want to help, but they made him do it. Simon would rather be a part of the crowd, standing and watching. He did not come to help Jesus, but there he is, carrying the cross.
I felt sorry for Simon of Cyrene. He had no way of preparing for what happened to him. He was a farmhand coming in from the fields when the soldiers forced him to carry the cross. I overheard him complain to himself, "Why me? Don't you dare condemn Simon. You would have been startled, reluctant, and bitter too, if you had been in his shoes. You must learn as Simon did, that much in life is not just and fair. You will be startled by the crosses thrust upon you when you least expect them. When that happens, my Father and I will not hold against you your selfish cry of, 'Why me?' But you must quickly move beyond that. You must not spend your life looking for reasons for your crosses. You may never know until you die."
The sixth station. Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. As Jesus walked to Golgotha, the place of the crucifixion, he met many of the people whom he had preached to and taught about his Father's kingdom. Some of these people cared about Jesus and were filled with great sorrow to see him suffering so. Suddenly, the march to Calvary stopped. One woman, Veronica is her name, realizing the pain Jesus was in, stepped out of the crowd. Taking a cloth, she gently began to wipe the face of Jesus, to clear his sweat and blood. She offered Jesus a little comfort.
I am grateful to Veronica for wiping the blood, sweat, and dirt from my eyes. She had not been as close to me in life as some others had, but she responded when I needed an act of kindness. Do you realize that she was the last person in my earthly life to touch me in a gentle act of mercy? You never know when an act of kindness you do will be the last one a person experiences. So, you should regard every opportunity as an act that will last in eternity. Would you have wiped my face? How can you say you would? if you have ignored 1,000 troubled faces before you saw mine.
The seventh station, Jesus falls for the second time. The cross weighed heavily upon Jesus, so much so that it caused him to fall to the ground again. This is the second time Jesus has fallen on the dirt road. This time, it is even harder to get up. Again, the soldiers forced him to get up and move on. Out of love for us, Jesus struggled and tried. Soon he was on his feet again. Jesus continued on his march that would lead to his death and to our salvation.
The weight of the cross is heavy. My body hurts all over. My heart hurts most of all. The feeling of betrayal, the feeling of being forgotten, and the feeling of being abandoned by my closest friends. It is almost too much to take. This fall shows me, for being human as nothing else on my way to Calvary. Simon had eased my burden. Veronica had soothed my sweaty face. I cannot express how deeply I value loving touches in the midst of the hate, the cursing, and the chaos all around me. They encourage me to press on.
The eighth station, Jesus speaks to the women of Jerusalem. Many people followed Jesus as he walked the road to Calvary. Among the crowds of people were some women who were weeping because Jesus was in such pain and being treated so unjustly. Jesus looked kindly upon them and said,
Women of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but rather for yourselves and your children.
As great as Jesus' personal pain was, he was attentive to those around him.
These women waiting by the roadside watch me pass. They are so sorry for me that they are crying. They should be crying for themselves, because many people are going to suffer terribly as a consequence for choosing sin over love. Has everyone flocked here to show me genuine sympathy? Or are some engaged in the formal practice of mourning the condemned? I do not tolerate religious practices that are used to avoid deep personal commitment to me and my Father. Sometimes it is better to be silent, to pour your heart out where only God can hear. Go to your room and pray. When you know for whom you weep, come then to Calvary's road.
Jesus falls for the third and final time. Jesus neared the hill of Calvary. He was exhausted. He was extremely weak, and the cruelty of his executioners was showing. They tried to hasten his steps, though he hardly had the strength to move. Once more, Jesus fell beneath the weight of his cross. The top of the hill means the end of his human life, but it also is the place where he can save the world and do the Father's will. Despite the weakness that overcame his body, the sight of the hill gave him added strength to get up once more and move. Jesus lifted himself up and continued on the way of the cross, suffering unjust pain and insults.
I have no regrets about this fall. My strength was gone. I did not want to fall, and I did not want to stand. I just fell. This time I had to be helped up. I couldn't get up myself. You may someday fall for the third time and have no strength to get up. You have to be picked up by others. Don't let that lead to despair. It does not mean that you are less than human. Do not let those around you rob you of your dignity when you are on the ground.
The 10th station. Jesus is stripped of his garments. Jesus arrived at Calvary. The soldiers removed his heavy cross from his shoulders and placed it on the ground. Then they ripped off his cloak, the one that covered him after his bleeding. All the wounds were torn up once more. Jesus' body was exposed as full of blood and sores. Some of the people made jokes and laughed at him. Others spit at him. The soldiers then took his garments and threw them into a pile. The robe that Jesus had been wearing throughout this ordeal was made from one woven piece of cloth, and the soldiers did not wish to tear it, so they cast dice to see who would get it. This fulfilled the scripture passage that foretold, "They divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my robe."
When I was stripped of my robes, it hurt because parts were plastered to my body with caked blood. But it didn't hurt my ego. By this time, I had nothing to cling to. I was empty. I want so much for you to know and live the truth, symbolized by the stripping of my clothes. My human life was an emptying of myself, so I could be filled by my Father. Your life must be the same.
The 11th station. Jesus is nailed to the cross. When they came to Golgotha, the soldiers stretched Jesus on the cross. They began to take large spikes and drive them through his hands and feet. They took 2 others, both of them criminals, to be put to the death with Jesus. Jesus was nailed to the wood, An inscription proclaiming his offense read, "The King of the Jews." This was placed over his head. People who passed by laughed and jeered at Jesus, saying such things as, "Save yourself by coming down from the cross." The chief priests and scribes also joined in and taunted him. He saved others, but he cannot save himself? Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now, so we can see and believe in him. But Jesus, who gave them nothing but love and kindness, looked up to his Father and said,
"Father, forgive them. They don't know what they are doing."
The 12th station. Jesus dies on the cross. From noon onward, there was a darkness over the whole land that lasted until mid-afternoon. Toward mid-afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice,
My God, why have you forsaken me?"
The people stood there watching, while the Jewish leaders made fun of Jesus. He saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Messiah whom God has chosen. The soldiers also made fun of him. They came up to him and offered him cheap wine and said, "Save yourself, if you are the King of the Jews." One of the criminals, hanging there, hurled insults at him, saying, "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." The other criminal rebuked him, saying, "Don't you fear God? We deserve this, but he has done no wrong." And he began to plead, "Remember me, Jesus, when you come into your kingdom."
I tell you this, today you will be with me in paradise.
At 3 o'clock, the sun stopped shining, and darkness covered the whole country. The curtain hanging in the temple was torn in two. Jesus cried out in a loud voice,
"Father, into your hands I commend my spirit."
and with these words, Jesus breathed his last. The army officer saw what had happened, and he praised God, saying, "Certainly, this man was the Son of God." When the people who had gathered there to watch the crucifixion saw what had happened, they all went back home, beating their breasts. All those who knew Jesus personally, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood off in a distance to see these things. taken from the cross and placed in the arms of Mary.
When you were born, I held you, a little babe sleeping gently, and here you are once again, in my arms, that sleeping babe. I watched you grow into a man. You left your home to share your love, and now you've come back to me. Into my arms they set you free. You talked of love and forgiveness. Love your neighbor and yourself. This cruel fate we're not both spared, for in my arms you're lying there. Father, please forgive them, for they killed my only son. I pray your will to be done, for in my arms my life lives on. In my arms our life lives on.
The 14th station. Jesus is placed in the tomb. Together, the disciples of Jesus wrapped his body in a long linen cloth, which was saturated with myrrh and aloes according to Jewish burial customs. Near the places where Jesus had been crucified was a garden in which there was a tomb newly carved out of the rock. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus took the body of Jesus and buried it there. Then they left Jesus and went away. However, some of the women who had followed Jesus remained there for a time before going home to observe the Sabbath day of rest. Please join me in the closing prayer. Lord, you were buried in a borrowed tomb loaned to you by your friend Joseph. We too want to give to you. We give you our voices, we give you our hands, we give you our hearts. We will be your body, we will be your resurrection. We pray this day for courage to make our way as you did, for then the kingdom of justice will reign, and the wounds of the world will be healed. Amen. Please leave in silence.